Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Urban Legends video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your new suggestions. This one truly a testament to why I love doing these videos, because if not for the fact of this playlist, I never would have come across something so bizarre but so amazing at the same time when it comes to this suggestion. This was a very unique, weird phenomenon that occurred in the middle of the 1700s here in the United States. In fact, reading this information now, it proves that truth is truly stranger than fiction. This really did happen, and what a sight and sound this must have been. I truly would have loved to have been there at the time to experience it myself, because apparently it was just a one-off thing, but it definitely made an impressionable impact on the people there, so much so that to this very day it's still being almost celebrated and talked about. In fact, you're looking at a representation of it here. It goes by a very unique name too. It's called Battle of the Frogs. That's right, this is not something like involving a video game title. This is truly what occurred here in the United States in the 1700s. It was known as the Battle of the Frogs. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all this fascinating info. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are with regards to this very unusual phenomenon. So here's essentially what occurred. Again, this happened in the middle of 1754, June to be specific. No exact date per se, but still gives you a time period, at least with regards to it being in the summer. And it occurred in an area called Windham, Connecticut. This was a time when the citizens there were going through not just a severe drought, but also some wartime. Apparently there was the French and Indian War that was occurring there. There was a lot of battles associated with not just the French citizens there, but also American natives, those who were there at the time as well. And this was continuing for quite a while. As it turns out, on one particular night, all of a sudden, as people were just resting or laying in bed, that's when they began to hear a very, very unusual sound, something that became almost escalating through certain points. So it started low, then it started to get higher and louder, and then louder and louder still. People were baffled as to what this was. There was the sound as if it was almost like an earthquake, is one description. There was another sound involving almost like war drums. People also stated that it sounded like the earth was actually moving as well, and then also that there was sounds involving names being heard, and that there was yelling too. There was also sounds involving wars, like the usual kind of sounds one would hear with regards to that. People actually thought that they were under attack yet again. And so much so, in fact, that people took up arms within that town. People ran from their beds. Who knows where they went? Some of them went into the streets. Some of them came out armed with guns and knives. People heard recognizable names as well throughout all this calamity. The thing is, it wouldn't stop. It started off at a low point, and then it just continued and just continued. And even then, people thought that they heard also the sounds of Native Americans throughout this time. Like, in other words, some of the phrases that some of the Native Americans have mentioned throughout their own battles. So they were really freaked out. Everyone was wanting to know what it was. They couldn't find the source. The fact that this happened in the middle of the night definitely made things even worse. It wasn't until the next morning, though, that's when it was discovered what happened. Some of the locals there, some of the colonists found this cause of a noise. They went to a location that was kind of nearby, not too far away, but not too close, but still there. That's when they came across a pond, or a mill pond, and that's where they saw a very unusual, kind of frightening sight, but still something that was the least that they'd expect. There, in a very compact area, still very large. In fact, it was measured about 4 miles in length, and then about maybe 40 yards wide, to give you an idea. That's pretty large if you ask me. But filled throughout all that were just tens of thousands of frogs. tens of thousands of them. I would imagine something like that size, you would probably have several 100,000. They were there, some of them still alive, but many of them were dead. In fact, the idea was this. They went to that mill pond sometime in the night because remember I was mentioning earlier about that area experiencing a very severe drought there in the middle of June. Well, as it turns out, these frogs, these bullfrogs to be specific, were also in a sort of a calamity. Like they too were trying to find water. They had apparently went to one source, but it was gone. There was almost like there was two of them, like two large groups of them. One was already at one location, I'm guessing, and the other one went to the other location. But when no water was found there, they went to the spot where the other ones must have been at already. Or who knows, maybe both of them happened to be there by pure happen chance, like they both came across that mill pond at the same time. And as it turns out, this became a huge competition. Kind of interesting when you think about it, the irony, the almost poeticness associated with it, because earlier I was mentioning about the French and Indian War, and of course that has to do with two forces just battling each other out within the same land. Here you have a similar situation with these bullfrogs. All of a sudden you had a very tight, compact space. Here you had tens of thousands of frogs, all of them trying to get the same source of water. And because they were there and their water was so limited, that's when they started fighting each other. That's what that noise was. Imagine in tandem, tens of thousands of frogs all leaping at the same time. You would think one of them, if you've heard a frog jump, it makes a small little thud, right? Well, imagine tens of thousands of them at the same time, and you can imagine that's where that earthquake sound I was mentioning earlier came from. And then imagine now tens of thousands of them all fighting, shrieking at each other, tearing each other apart, just trying to survive. And that's essentially what occurred during that fateful night. That's why it became called the Battle of the Frogs, because it truly was a battle to the death between all of these very, very loud frogs all trying to find some source of water. Now, there's another explanation to this too. There's the idea that they may have gone looking for water. Maybe they found some, maybe they were satisfied, and so on. And then when they came across this other group of frogs, it instead of being like, let's say, a competition for water, it instead became a mating ritual. Like, in other words, there was a large amount of males within that group, a smaller amount of females, and then that's when they started to battle it out. The males did, at least, to try to get, obviously, attention from the females, but they were far outnumbered when it came to the males to the females. So it, instead of, let's say, it being like a usual mating ritual, it just became an all-out war at that point. So that's another guess associated with it. But that's essentially what occurred there on that night. In some cases, it's actually pretty hilarious because people swore that some of the names mentioned were tied to some of the local prominent people there, like some of the lawyers and some of the colonels. They swore that they heard their names being called by the frogs. I imagine that was just pure coincidence. In other words, this wasn't, so it's almost like the idea of confirmation bias. Like if you try to hear your name within those frogs, whatever they're saying, you're going to hear it eventually. I think that was the case here too. But otherwise, yeah, these frogs, they absolutely made a very prominent night, one that became memorialized within that town's folklore. It definitely grew to being a very, very large local legend, so much so to this day that there's still, as you can see in one picture here, statues dedicated to the occasion. In fact, there's 4 of these statues that stand around within some of those locations. And then there's also memorializations through songs as well dedicated to them. There's ballads. There were even banknotes, like little, I guess, items showcasing dollar symbols on them that were dedicated to them. And there's also been operas as well. In fact, to this very day, there's even a bridge that's associated with this phenomenon, this fateful thing that occurred that night. Again, it's a very true item. It's not an urban legend, but the size of it, like when it comes to people and the prominence, of remembering this type of situation is definitely taken on its own aura. And so to this day, people almost still talk about it. Like they talk about it in a reverent manner. And that's why it's still something that's interesting and very, very bizarre to focus on. Fascinating stuff. But if anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed, please post those comments below. What do you think about this too? The night that a town, an area thought they were under attack and they thought that they were done for, they thought there was an earthquake, that there was going to be a huge battle, and it turns out there was a battle, but it was instead between these frogs. Fascinating stuff. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.